Brutal, savage and bestial, orcs are utterly warlike in nature and revel in destruction, carnage and the thrill of the fight. In today's video, I'll show you my take on painting a grimdark, savage and monstrous Ork Big Mek. I'll cover such topics as pre-weathering, alien skin, heavily rusted metals and special effects. I'm Black Chalice Studio and you're watching the Grimdark Compendium. To add some extra detail to this miniature, I decided to scrape off the rivets and replace them with some 3D printed bolts and caps. I also decided to replace the cables on his back with some scratch built versions. To begin our pre-weathering stage, we're going to come in with some physical distressing. For this, we come in with a sharp scalpel blade and begin to cut, chip, scrape away at the armour plates on the miniature, creating battle damage. Just work your way around the miniature slowly, adding as much as you see fit, but try and remember that less is always more. And to add some further visual interest here, we're going to come in with a surface manipulation technique. I apply some extra thin plastic cement to one armour panel at a time, and then come in with an old frayed brush to jab and tap at the surface, creating a pitted metal type look. Next up, we're going to come in with our first texturing pass. For this, we're using Vallejo thick mud. I'll take this straight from the tub with an old brush and apply it in a stippling manner towards the bottom of the legs, the feet, anything that's fairly close to the ground. Once applied, I'll quickly wipe off my brush and then come back to feather away at the edges, creating a smooth blend. And for our second texturing pass, we're going to come in with the AK Interactive Corrosion Texture Paste. For the first pass with this, I'm going to dilute it 1:1 with water. I apply this to the metallic parts of the miniature, focusing more on the deep crevices and areas that would naturally corrode and rust. I'll then come back in with a neat application just where I want the really crusty texture. And this is how we look after the pre-weathering stages are complete. For the priming of this miniature, I'm using Steiner Res Black, shot through the airbrush at around 25 psi. I'll build this up over a few thin coats and then allow everything around 15 to 20 minutes to dry. The first step of laying down the skin colour is going to be some pre-highlighting using Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White. This is thinned with roughly 3 parts water and applied in a zenithal manner, gradually building up the opacity on the higher points of the miniature. Our first skin colour here is going to be GW Elysian Green. This is also thinned 3:1 with water and applied in a few thin, subtle coats covering the entirety of the skin. Once we've built up a solid base colour on the skin, we'll move on to the highlight. For the highlight, we use 3 parts Elysian Green to 1 part Pro Acryl White. The last step here is to filter on some GW Colia Green shade just to the areas of the skin that I want the deepest shadows. For the unifying wash on the metals and the red portions of the armour, we're going to make a mix of 1:1 Villainy Ink Ichor of the Damned and Goon's Grime. I dilute this with equal parts mineral spirits and apply this as a fairly liberal wash to all of the metals in the armour. I'm not too fussed if it gets onto the black portions either, but we'll deal with those separately later on. Once this has been applied, I'll come in with a blow dryer on medium heat for around 30 seconds just to flash off the spirits in the wash. For the removal pass here, I'm going to use some Q-tips and spirits and gently tap and dab at the areas that I applied the wash, reactivating it and removing it from the higher points. I'll focus more on the red armour panels here, taking off the majority of the unifying wash, leaving the metals fairly dirty and grungy. I also remove any of the wash that overspilled onto the black portions of the armour. The Ichor of the Damned from the previous unifying wash dries with a satin to gloss sheen, so to bring this back down, I went over the black and red armour plates with some AK Ultra Matte varnish. This will play a part in our endgame goal of surface finish variation. Now we've got the initial unifying washes on the miniature, this is how we're looking. To start bringing some visual interest into the black armour, we're going to come on with a filtering pass of Villainy Ink Ex Machina. This is diluted 2 parts spirits to 1 part paint and applied as an overall glaze to each of the black panels. This gives a really nice dusty and worn look to black armour. To reinforce this effect a little more, we're going to come in with a neat Goon's Grime application and apply this like a crevice wash, just around the details and between the panel lines, places like that. This is one of my go-to approaches for painting black armour to give it some depth, some colour and some visual interest. We move back to the blow dryer again on medium heat for around 30 seconds, just to flash off the spirits in the wash so it appears touch dry. For the removal pass on this portion, I'll come in with some spirits in a brush, and I'm aiming to remove 99% of the wash from the raised portions of the armour, just leaving it in the crevices and around the details. Once the unifying wash has been removed and it's all dry, you'll see the wonderful, dusty, worn and slightly reddish tint it gives to the black armour. Now we can start working on that green skin. My initial wash here is a 3:1 mix of Villainy Ink Dystopian brown and Colia green, with just a touch of Ichor the Damned added to darken it up. I apply this fairly sparingly, not really allowing it to pull in any of the crevices, just giving all of the skin a nice even coat. Once this has been applied, I'll leave it on the miniature to dry for a little while I tackle a couple of other steps. To reintroduce some shine to the metallic areas that we applied the unifying wash earlier, I'm going to come in with some lead belcher, diluted 3:1 water to paint. For any hard edges, I'll just come back in and apply tiny lines and dots with this mix, and for the broader metallic areas, I'll just glaze it on over a couple of layers. Moving back to the skin, I'll come in for a removal pass with some spirits and a Q-tip, just gently reactivating the wash, then swapping for the dry end to blend it away from the raised areas. To bring some colour back into the red areas now, we're going to come in with Pro Acryl Burnt Red. My intention with these areas is to have them looking like they're old and battered and pretty abused, so I'm going to use a stippling technique. I dilute the paint with around 3 parts water and lightly tap and dab at certain areas, gradually building up the saturation of the red. Once we've completed that pass, I'll come in with equal parts Bold Pyrrole Red and Burnt Red and apply a second highlight layer, covering less of the previous step. Red is a fairly transparent colour anyway, so we're going to build this up gradually over a few thin passes, just concentrating on less area each time. To highlight the ribbed cable areas, I'll just use a downwards dry brushing motion. For the final highlight colour, we're going to come in with pure Bold Pyrrole Red, diluted around 3:1 again, and applied as small lines and dots along the leading edges. For the leather portions on this miniature, such as his apron, I wanted to convey the fact that they were old, battered and well worn, so I came in with a stippling pass. For this I used the original base colour of 1:1 Rhinox hide and Vallejo leather brown, thin 2 parts water to 1 part paint, and stippled up over 2 or 3 layers, just avoiding the recesses. I then repeated the previous step, just covering less area, using a 2:1 mix of leather brown and Rhinox hide. To start adding some texture and depth, I added a small amount of deepkin flesh to the previous mix and started applying small lines and dots along the edges and the folds. For the final step, I added a touch more deepkin flesh and just carried on applying these small lines and dots, simulating wear and tear and scratches. Just to bring back the shine on the bronze parts, we're going to come in with a 1:1 mix of Darkstar Bronze and Vallejo Metal Colour Gold. For our first highlight here, I'm going to add a touch of Vallejo Silver to the previous mix and come in for a light stippling pass just along the raised edges and the tops of details. I thin this down with 2 parts water and just concentrate on the uppermost edges here, applying small lines and dots to simulate wear and tear and scratches. Once we've got this pass done, we'll move back over to the silvers. Our next step here is going to be punching up the contrast on the silver metallics by coming in for a few sparse highlights. For this, I take a 1:1 mix of lead belcher and Vallejo silver and dilute this 2 parts water to 1 part paint. I go quite sparingly here, just adding a few lines and dots to the top edges, as I want these metals to look old and worn and tarnished. And once we got that step complete, this is how we're looking so far. To add another layer of visual interest to the armour, we're going to come in and add some battle damage by way of sponge chipping. For this, I thinned down some lead belcher slightly and used an old ripped up piece of sponge that I had laying around on my desk. I work most of the paint off of the sponge and then go in with soft tapping and dabbing motions along any edges that would normally catch wear and tear. Moving on to the first of our effects on this miniature, we're going to come in with some rust. For this first pass, we're going to come in with Villainy Ink Ex Machina, diluted 1:1 with spirits. This is applied sparingly like a crevice wash, just to any areas that I want to build up that initial rust colour. I build this up over 2 applications in some areas, just to reinforce the saturation of the colour a little bit. 30 seconds with a blow dryer on medium heat will flash off the spirits in this wash, getting us ready for the removal pass. I then came in with a brush and some spirits and gently feathered the wash away from the raised edges. You can take as much as you like off here. I left it fairly grungy because after all, this is an orc. For our second rust pass here, we're going to bring out the Dirty Down rust. I dilute this 1:1 with water and apply it fairly sparingly to areas that I want a more pronounced rust effect. When we dilute Dirty Down with water, it will drive with a lighter, more orangish yellow look, which sets us up nicely for our final rust step. For our final rust effect here, we're going to come in with Neat Dirty Down. This is applied just to the deepest crevices and the areas that I want the most crusty, nasty looking rust. The next effect we're going to apply to this miniature is some oxidation to the bronze. For this, I take 3 parts Abtalung 502 turquoise lights to 1 part smoke and mix it down with roughly 4 parts spirits. I'll then apply this as a light crevice wash to any areas of the bronze that I want to simulate verdigris and oxidation. The final oxidation step is going to be Neat Turquoise Lights. This is thinned down the same as the previous step and just applied to the very deepest crevices. I'll hit these areas with a blow dryer on medium heat for 30 seconds or so and then come in for the removal pass. I alternate between a Q-tip and a brush with some spirits here and just gently remove this from the raised areas and soften any hard edges where we applied the wash. How much you remove here is totally down to your personal preference. I'll come back in here with some thin Vallejo silver just to punch up the contrast on the silver metallics by picking out the very highest points. Moving on to another effect here, we're going to add some grease and oil stains. Ica of the Dam dries with a satin to gloss finish and is absolutely brilliant for effects like this. I thin this down with just a touch of mineral spirits and apply it to all of the areas that I want to look really oily and nasty. I built this up over 2 to 3 layers in areas that I wanted a stronger effect, such as the pistons on his legs, his power plant and his weapons. At this point I thought the red portions of his armour needed toning down a bit, so I came in with a 1:1 mix of Goon's Grime and spirits for a filtering pass. I hit this with a blow dryer on medium heat for around 30 seconds and then came in with a Q-tip and some spirits for a fairly light removal pass, just taking it away from the raised edges. Moving back to the skin, I came in with some neat Villainy Ink Carrion Crimson to add some blood and gore effects. I gently stippled this on over 2 or 3 applications to any areas where the metal meets the skin, the deeper folds of his muscles and around his knuckles as well. I also took some of the particles found in Carrion Crimson and added these to the areas that I wanted the most bloody and nasty look. I then came in with a brush and some spirits and very gently feathered away any hard edges where we applied the blood from the previous step. While we're doing the blending pass, we can also pick up some of the particles in Carrion Crimson and move them around, creating a really nice mottled look. The final effect we're going to come in with today is some decay. For this, I'm using Villainy Ink Decay of Death, diluted 1:1 with mineral spirits. I apply this in patches to his apron and the bottom of his feet, and once the first pass has dried, I go back in for a second, slightly more focused pass. I then come in with a brush and some spirits and feather away at the edges, leaving most of the wash in the recesses and cleaning the rest away. Moving on to the last steps here, I decided to come back in with some satin varnish and add a few areas of surface finish variation to the miniature. I applied this slightly thin to the eye lens, and also to the areas where the skin meets the metal and the blood effect is the strongest. I'll then come back in with some ultra matte varnish and apply this in a stippling manner to a few of the armour panels in random patches. After this application, we now have a variety of finishes on the miniature, ranging from dead matte all the way through to full gloss. We can now move on to the final step, just to add a slight bit more visual interest onto this miniature. The final effect we're going to introduce here is some scorched and burnt metal. I take some slightly thinned Abaddon black on my brush and then work most of the pigment off on an old piece of cloth. With that done, I'll focus on the gun barrels and the prongs that come out from underneath. I stipple this on over 2 to 3 layers, gradually building up the black on these parts of the miniature. And here we have the end result, a grimdark, bestial and monstrous Ork Big Mek. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed today's video. For many more like it, including an in-depth look at all of the techniques discussed today, head on over to the Grimdark Compendium. Check out the new Forest Freaks Challenge while you're there, where you'll get the chance to show off your skills, earn glory, and win some fantastic prizes. I bid you a good week, keep it grim, and I'll see you next time.